everyone, welcome to the Fireside Chat. I'm excited to welcome you all to the industry panel and discuss the impact of generative AI in multiple industries. Before we dive in, let me introduce you to our panelists. It's my pleasure to welcome Cynthia Lu, Senior Director of Gen AI Modeling at Adobe, Katherine Chou, Senior Director of Product Management at Google, Xiao, Director of Developer Relations for Cross-Geo at NVIDIA, and Ovetta Sampson, Director of UX in ML at Google. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I've prepared some questions for you, but let's see what this conversation takes us. Shall we get started? Okay, fantastic. So we've been hearing about generative AI and new emerging technologies in the large language model space. And we had a few sessions on Gen AI and LLMs early in this event. But for those just tuning in now, I would like to start by asking each one of you to share your thoughts about Gen AI. What is generative AI, and why is there so much hype around this technology? Is it a technology that is going to stay, or will it be gone in 6 months? Cynthia, would you like to go first and maybe talk a little bit more about the opportunities with Gen AI?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. There's a lot of news about Gen AI in the large language model domain, but actually, Gen AI is the type of AI technology that can generate text, images, or other media using generative models. And generative AI models can learn the characteristics of their the massive amount of input training data that they're trained on and generate new data that has similar characteristics but never existed before. And I think the current rapid development and innovation around Gen AI is not a hype, but a sign of maturity of this line of technology. After actually many years of research and development since the invention of GAN in 2014 in the visual domain, and I'm sure there are even earlier precursor technology in the NLP domain. And I have participated in the early research of generative models in the last 7 years and witnessed the tremendous progress in academia and industry have made together in this space. The quality and the performance of such models have both significantly improved to a point that they're really becoming commodity and actually useful in people's job and life. For example, over 3 billion images have been generated after the first release of Adobe Firefly image foundation models in March this year. And Photoshop's generative fill and expand feature, powered by Firefly image foundation model, has been the most successful feature release in Photoshop history. And we're seeing active usage from our customers ranging from creative professional to communicators, marketers, to casual users. And I've certainly personally hope that this exciting technology will continue to evolve and touch more and more people's lives.
Oh, that was a fantastic answer. And I really want to double down on the creative industry later on in this session. But for now, let's go to Ovetta. Ovetta, how about you? What's your vision on Gen AI, and how do we ensure that it is designed with a human-centric approach?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for having me on the panel. I think it's really important that when we think about the advancements that were mentioned previously about technology, that we also think about the slow human adoption. But it's been kind of crazy because generative AI has been very popular because it's the first time that I think the populace outside of developers and a very small percentage of people who really understand machine learning or have been creating machine learning have been engaging with AI. I think my aunt asked me the other day, what's with this AI thing? And so I think it's really important that we remember that as amazing as these technologies are, is that there are real human engagement risks that come with them. And with AI and machine learning, and especially generative AI, those risks can be engaged in many levels, and that's include cognitively, psychology-wise, physically as well as culturally and socially. So it's really important that when we are designing products that are using these AI-enabled technologies, that we recognize and identify those risks as early as possible so that we can design products to help to use the amazing technology for good experiences with people, but also minimize the risk that engaging with the technology can bring about. And those risks, for example, just in the creative industry, we have to think about kind of like what happens when people start generating content that previously was generated by humans. How do we deal with the risk of displacing labor and things like that?
Oh, thank you so much for touching upon those points. So we've seen many cool applications coming from Adobe, lots of innovation in the space. Thank you for calling out the fact that it's also a lot of risk still associated with the development of these technologies. So, Katherine, what are the ethical considerations of Gen AI?
Thanks for having me. I'll touch on the point that Ovetta made, which is that there's a lot of ethical considerations for machine learning in general, which just people were less aware of, but we've been working at it for quite some time. And this is the fact that machine learning, like generative AI, is based on a lot of data, and that data already has inherent potential biases that have been codified from systemic biases that exist in society today. And so there's certainly an aspect that we've always been applying to machine learning generally. But what's opened up because of the generative AI conversation is that it's very powerful and amazing what it can do from a language and communication perspective. In terms of how people experience it, though, because it's so masterful with the language, it can get confused with being a domain expert or having deep knowledge. And I think these aren't the same thing, being very masterful with the language versus actually having accurate and grounded knowledge. So there's a lot of additional development that needs to happen to actually ground and make these models consistent, especially in the spaces I work in, whether it's health and science. And it's very, very important that we not only take into consideration what's factual, what the model should be doing, and also what's safe, so what should the model not be doing. And these are aspects that are just applied differently because of the way generative AI works, and things like additional middleware for retrieval augmentation from authoritative or trusted sources. These are all things that are required to inject knowledge back into the models.
Thank you so much, Katherine. And I really like the fact that you touched upon what the model should be doing and what the model should not be doing. And I want to double down on that in just a little bit. But let's just go back to Wei and hear her opinion about the challenges and limitations of Gen AI and AI development in general.
Joana, that's a great question. As mentioned, we observe huge opportunities with generative AI. But I have to say, Gen AI is still in its infancy stage. So to Katherine's point, we're still facing a lot of challenges and limitations. I think responsible AI is probably the most frequently raised challenges. How can we ensure AI is developed, deployed, and used in an ethical and legal way? Transparency in the context of responsible AI refers to the process to understand what is in our data set, how does our algorithm work, and ultimately, how do we use our algorithm to impact real-life use cases. A related concept, explainable AI, goes one step further to explain how a system works and why a particular recommendation is made to the end user. So I think responsible companies have a set of AI principles as the North Star to guide the process. The other thing, of course, is data quality. The quality of training data impacts the quality of our generative AI model, and the low quality data will result in AI hallucination. So it's critical that generative AI models is trained on diverse and representative data set. And as part of the NVIDIA team, resource requirement is one of the common challenge we have been hearing again and again. Training generative AI models demands substantial computing resources, including significant amount of memory and high performance GPUs or TPUs. So startups and the developers may face challenges to access these computing resources to develop something for their own, which in turn limits their ability to offer personalized, customized solutions. But all in all, I would say all challenges present opportunities. So the efforts of generative AI practitioners collaboratively were working together to overcome these hurdles and propel generative AI to new heights.
Oh, absolutely. Multi-sector collaboration and cross-functional collaboration in this industry is so important right now. And we've touched upon this in the previous answers, but I would like to double down on one particular case. Katherine, about 10 years ago, supervised and deep learning started to get really good at labeling, which was a big breakthrough for medical diagnosis. So what are some specific examples of how Gen AI is being used today? Can you share some cases with our audience?
Yeah, we'd be glad to. So with LLMs, we have this breakthrough in language, and it allows for much more sophisticated forms of data transformation. And that's first transformations like summarization, synthesis, composition, conversational dialogue. And all of these things lead to really powerful health assistant experiences. And what you're seeing is the naturally expressive way that LLMs can actually engage with users has great bedside manners, and it can all be trained into being able to have a very personalized experience. There's a lot of additional breakthroughs that are happening in terms of how to individualize and personalize these models, and they have the ability to be stateful memory, and they have very, very powerful reinforcement learning, human feedback loops. And so this means that these models can get very individualized and personalized, and something that in healthcare we've always aimed for is personalized healthcare. And this is unlocking all of that ability to work across that kind of data and also the collectively continuously learning about the individual. Finally, there's the fact that it's actually very transformative in the education space. And one of the things in the healthcare space is scarcity of resource. And so capacity building in the health workforce is powerful in being able to actually leverage these kinds of models in that context where it can lead to the dissemination of much better expertise and knowledge is something that is now possible with the LM.
So we're seeing big improvements in healthcare, but let me ask you a follow-up question. What are the challenges of using this type of technologies, and Gen AI in particular, in healthcare when it comes to data privacy and security? So how do we tackle those issues?
Yeah, good question. So there isn't anything particularly unique about the technical requirements for security and privacy for personal health information, PHI, versus what I would say personally identifiable information, PII. The difference lies typically in experience more from the authorizations, the certifications, the kind of de-identification laws that are enforced by regulatory bodies when it comes to sharing that data. And so the bar is just set very high. And so I'm going to just talk generally about privacy and security with regards to generative AI, because what it has done is, first of all, it is in its infancy. And so you're seeing things like red teams that are able to break models out there like ChatGPT, where you can see exploited and it dumps out kind of training data that was supposed to be private. And when you see kind of that happen, there's all these research areas that need to be explored. You know, how do you host Gen AI models to be private and secure inference? How do you ensure that you can train confidential accelerators? Can you build private by default systems completely? Additionally, these advanced assistants that are possible from LLMs, it requires sometimes access to personal data that you want on device. And these models, as they get pushed onto device, require kind of continuous processing of ambient data. So there's a whole field about how to protect and process the data effectively in terms of research work that can be done. And putting these models on device also requires protecting these models from reverse engineering. So there's just quite a lot on the client side as well as the server side that opens up as a result of Gen AI.
Thank you so much for your answer and explanation. So far we've heard that Gen AI with large language models, it uses web scale data. The economics of this data has gone down tremendously. Companies who build on these APIs are shifting from on-prem computing to cloud computing, and the models are very natural. We are seeing a paradigm shift in the industry, that's for sure. And because these models work very well on unstructured data, and in cases that have been historically in the human domain, such as creativity, productivity, for example, we are literally bringing down the barriers on how we interact with computers. So, Cynthia, going back to you, what are some examples and potential benefits of Gen AI for creative professionals? And let's talk about the opportunities as well.
Sure. As I mentioned, Photoshop released a generative fill feature that is very popular since its launch in May. And in this particular case, it cuts down the time needed for mundane tasks such as object removal, image expansion that people would otherwise do manually in Photoshop, right? And these type of tasks can usually take hours to complete, and now with Gen AI, they take seconds, really freeing creatives to spend more time on more creative tasks. And text-to-image workflow also offers a way for creatives to quickly visualize their mental concepts into visual artifacts, right? For ideation and for later polishing for their actually final work in familiar products that they use. And at our annual Adobe Max Creativity Conference in October, we released Firefly Vector and Firefly Design model that goes beyond simple image generation to direct vector format generation inside Illustrator, and also layered and editable design generation in Adobe Express. And both are our attempts to complement the creative workflows of our customers in flagship apps that they're already familiar with. So really, we try to make their job easier, right? And by collecting the feedbacks through the apps, we also can leverage those data to further improve the quality and the user experiences these models offer.
Oh, that is fantastic. Freeing creators' time and improving workflows. That sounds like really, really good use cases in the creative industry. But I'm thinking, what are the challenges, especially around copyright and some of these creative applications?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. It's definitely a issue that we deal with really carefully. We try to take a responsible approach towards Gen AI. So we train our Firefly models exclusively on Adobe stock and third-party contents where we have purchased the license or the license has expired. And by default, our model does not generate copyrighted content. Think of Harry Potter, Disney characters. We cannot generate those contents. We also have careful pre-processing and post-processing guardrails in place, which further protect us from generating copyrighted content or leaving artist styles. And this allows us to actually industry first comfortably offer our customers indemnification protection, which differentiate us from competitors at the initial offering. Another challenge I want to touch on about is in the space of creativity is to find the best ways to offer our customer creative assistive Gen AI tools, right? Where they are in their familiar workflows and apps such as Photoshop and Illustrator, right? Really not just on its own, but really in the workflows where they're familiar with. And so how to design this user experience that is that can be discoverable, intuitive, and complementary to their workflow is an interesting one. And on the model development side, we listen carefully to our customers and attempt to design generative models to offer different levels of controls for different types of customers, from simple one button, one slider control to more fine-grained visual controls in the format of selection, sketching, compositions, or even in the format of manipulating 3D to allow creative professionals to express their creative freedom and feel more in control, essentially, of the generated content.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Moving on to Ovetta, there are many potential use cases where the return on investment can be high for enterprises. Generative AI models are very good in summarization, in content creation, understanding and generating text, code, images, and we are revolutionizing many horizontal practices across companies as well, such as customer service or process automation. These Gen AI solutions are not cheap, but they can become cheap if applicable to high-value business cases. So, Ovetta, what do you think are some of the most impactful business applications of Gen AI that are being built today?
Yes, I think, like Katherine mentioned, I think the popularity surrounding generative AI as opposed to traditional ML, it's really about the conversational interface, the ability for the machine to kind of interact with folks in a way that seems natural to us, as opposed to having everybody have to learn how to write code, so to speak. And so a lot of business applications that are using conversational interfaces, conversational chatbots or assistants, or using it for use cases where you can engage with, think of having 100 workers to do your automation work behind the scenes, and you directing that choir without having to write one line of code is pretty powerful. And I think where we get to ROI is the adoption of that beyond the tech floor. So if a company can so for example, Vertex AI with Google to help to build models within their own enterprise atmosphere using their own data, right? Like they train the models on, then you can harness the real improvement in automation and process within your own company, and that can really give you a high ROI. Like with Adobe, love the fact that they're training their models with risk in mind, right? Managing the risk of the creative content that actually goes into their models. So they don't really have to worry about the outcome of or the output of that. And if more companies can harness that through a conversational no code or low code or minimum code engagement, then it allows people outside of the tech floor to be able to economize and automate and save money and increase productivity. And so I think the use cases that we will see in the future that will hit a high ROI for large companies and small companies is working is using generative AI as a utility. It's something that you can empower new experiences with while not having to worry about a high risk of using that technology because you're working with companies like Adobe and Google who are helping you to do it and use this technology responsibly. So I think that's where we're going to hit kind of like CTOs are going to be dancing in the streets, I think, when they can figure out how to scale this technology within their own companies using their own data.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that we've talked about infrastructure before, and like we said, these solutions are not cheap, but they can become cheap if applicable to these high-value business cases. So let's move on to Wei and talk a little bit more about infrastructure and what NVIDIA is doing in this space. So when you're thinking about building infrastructure and solutions to help other companies scale their AI development, and Ovetta touched upon small and big companies, what are the applications that NVIDIA is working on to help other companies scale their AI development?
Yeah, I think infrastructure is one of the challenges a lot of Gen AI companies run into right now. ChatGPT really put NVIDIA as the forerunner of the generative AI race. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with NVIDIA's offering, I can give you a brief history here. NVIDIA invented GPU in 1999. GPU stands for Graphics Processing Unit. Initially, it was designed for graphics, simulation, rendering type of purpose. And GPUs have a lot more cores compared to CPU, so which make it ideal for parallel computing. And given the parallel architecture of artificial intelligence algorithm, GPU becomes one of the preferred choices for AI workloads. So right now, NVIDIA GPUs are powering different AI applications, from generative AI to industry metaverse, healthcare, life science. So to your question, Joana, about NVIDIA's solution and accelerated development and application, I think I would love to address it from two different aspects. One is technology, and the other is ecosystem. So let's start from the technology perspective. From hardware perspective, NVIDIA never stopped innovating. I will use the latest generation of NVIDIA GPU, H100 GPU, as an example. H100 features what we call transformer engine. As its name implies, it's specifically designed for processing transformer model, one of the highly adopted architectures for generative AI applications, and can dynamically process layers of transformer models. And for generative AI application, chances are one GPU is not sufficient for your workload. You need multiple GPU nodes, multiple GPU clusters, which makes the networking component critical to the performance of your Gen AI applications as well. So together with H100, we also offer what we call NVLink and InfiniBand. So NVLink and InfiniBand offers GPU to GPU interconnect speed to roughly 900 gigabytes per second. To give you the context here, a good Ethernet download speed is probably 100 megabytes per second. So you can see the magnitude of input and output the GPU is capable of processing. So this is a hardware. Transitioning to the software side, NVIDIA offers roughly 200 frameworks and libraries to our customers to help them get the best performance mileage out of the GPU itself. Many of these are open source, so customers can incorporate certain components from the open source code and integrate it into their own software stack. To give you an example here, AWS SageMaker actually incorporates certain components from NVIDIA Generative AI framework, NeMo, to get the best performance out of their solution. So this is the technology side. If we zoom out a little bit to see the ecosystem, NVIDIA actively support collaborations. For example, we support OpenAI's Whisper API, we support AWS SageMaker, and of course, we support Google's Vertex AI as well. We have customers running their workloads on NVIDIA GPUs as well on Google TPUs. Additionally, NVIDIA nurtures generative AI startups, especially AI platforms and tools type of startups. So to other panelists' point, I think providing the framework for generative AI development will help us unlock more use cases and opportunities down the road. So an example here, Together AI is a startup creating open source generative AI and AI deployment development platform solution type of startup. NVIDIA has been providing 360-degree support to the startup. And as of last week, Together AI closed their $100 million Series A funding, and NVIDIA participated in this funding round as well.
Oh, wow. Very exciting news. This conversation has been absolutely fantastic, but I would like to double down on some very important topics around biases, trust, and safety issues around the development of these technologies. Policies and regulations also play a key role into what we can develop. And for example, what we can build in the United States might be different from what we're allowed to build in Europe. So as an industry leader, how do you think about these components of Gen AI development? And I would like to ask this question to Cynthia. Would you like to give us some thoughts about this, please?
Sure. At Adobe, we do pay a lot of attention to mitigating safety and bias issues in the development of Firefly family of models. We closely follow the regulations in different countries. We have formed a ethical innovation committee composed of people with diverse backgrounds and representing different functions of the company, from product, engineering, design, executives, and research, right? And they really also represent diverse human representation to really govern this aspect. But I am a technologist, so I'm not going to touch too much on the regulations. So I do want to mention on the technology side what we're doing. So we're taking several active steps. First, on the data side, every Adobe stock images we train on goes through careful human moderation process to remove copyrighted content as much as possible. Also remove content that perpetuates bias and harm. We also conduct comprehensive analysis to try to understand what contents we have in stock, in what quantity, what do we need more, right? Whether the human portraits, photos that we have contain enough human representations. And if not, like maybe we should explicitly source and acquire contents to improve the general demographic representations and the concept coverage. Which we did actively several rounds of content acquisition to improve that aspect. And all of these really encouraged our model to generate less bias and more diverse content. However, harm and bias is really subjective, right? And it's even you ask human moderator, it's really hard to completely eliminate this issue, completely address from the data side. So on top of careful data moderation and sourcing, we also invent pre-processing and post-processing safety mitigation algorithms to further prevent and mitigate these issues. And we also have ongoing research and development looking into steering these models to generate less harmful and biased contents by default without the pre and post-processing. And to evaluate how we are doing, we conduct comprehensive crowdsourced human judgment tasks on versions of our models to track how we are trending on harm and bias issues on a weekly basis. And they really help inform our data and algorithm decisions to further improve on this aspect. And this is like, I definitely don't think that we're nowhere close to completely address this issue. It's really just the beginning of responsible AI. And we would love to partner with academia and other companies to tackle these challenging problems together.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. So Wei, how about you? How do you see regulations playing a role in the development of Gen AI?
Yeah, so for NVIDIA, we believe building safe product is a key part of trustworthy AI, and the regulations can certainly help ensure this. Frankly, many of these AI regulations are already in place. What we need to do is to identify existing gaps and actively bridge those gaps. And it's also important that all regulations work together with each other. For example, in EU, there is the EU AI Act, which requires bias reduction. In the meantime, there is a GDPR, which has a strict prohibition on identifying some of the demographic characteristics. So if these regulations can work in concert with each other, it will really help us move forward with the regulation. And similar to Cynthia, I'm not a regulator. I'm from a technical background. I would say from product perspective, NVIDIA also utilize guardrail to help us really enable like remove biases from the large language model applications. So we know that NVIDIA offers a generative AI framework called NeMo. It really enables our developers to guide chatbot easily to add programming rules to define desired user outcomes. And there are three components here. So one is called topical guardrail. Topical guardrails are designed to ensure that conversations stay focused on particular topic and prevent them from drifting away to undesired territories. Safety guardrail ensure that interaction with a large language model do not result in any misinformation or inappropriate content. And there is a security guardrail. Security guardrail prevent a large language model from executing malicious code. So this is the software perspective. In the meantime, sovereign AI infrastructure is really booming up. Many countries are investing into sovereign AI infrastructure. So nations can use their own data to train large language models. We began to see countries like India, Japan began to invest into their own AI infrastructure. And regional cloud service providers are also popping up for enhanced data privacy as well as transparency.
Thank you so much, Wei. Katherine, we see so many models being created every day, and the industry is moving so fast that many of our attendees might be thinking, okay, I see the demos, they are great, but in highly regulated industries such as healthcare and finance, should I be concerned about model quality? I know we talked a little bit about data and model quality, but would you please elaborate a little bit more on that?
Definitely, I can do that. Absolutely, you should be thinking about model quality. I think when people think about health specifically and finance, they are expecting a high bar for the quality of information they're receiving. So they aren't looking for creative answers, and some of the benefits of generative AI is hallucination in certain cases. In this case, it's not actually what we're looking for. So capabilities that we've invested in to improve and measure model quality around factuality, consistency, attribution, all of these things are crucial in the in a space where you want to be able to measure if the model output is doing what you're expecting it to do. The use case, though, really does matter. And so in the health space, you can do anything from trying to help a customer navigate to their healthcare system, to counseling them, to using it for summarization of an after visit summary or a patient record. All of these are different bars that you're setting in terms of what kind of quality you're looking for. And so the key to looking at model quality is going to be understanding the eval process and the evaluation process that you want around that particular use case. And there's also something quite nuanced about all of this, which is what is considered fact. So one person's fact can be another person's myth. And so there's a lot that goes into thinking through how you show the information as well for the model. And we actually have released at Google as part of BARD this double check feature where it allows you to see alternative positions on what is being presented and generated response and be able to see different perspectives that might be in opposition to what is being generated. And so I think this is one way of being able to continue to test and see if there's consistency in your model responses and also understand how they evolve over time. So this is all critical pieces of checking for the model quality.
Thank you so much, Katherine. And I would love to continue this discussion, but we are almost at time. So I have one last question to all of you. In less than 1 minute, what's your advice for people wanting to get started in generative AI after this event? What are the tools? What are the techniques? What are the community projects that they should be thinking of? Or what are the industries and the guides that they should be looking at in order to get started after the event? We know that developers like to get started right away. So what are your tips for our audience? And may I start with you, Cynthia, then Ovetta, Katherine, and we'll finish with Wei? Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah, so actually, I think about this from a slightly different angle, right? I would encourage people to think about the why instead of jumping straight into the what and how and the code, right? I think a lot of people want to work on this. It's a hot area, and technology goes in stages, right? And there's always a hot area at any single time. And really what we should think about is what unique perspectives do you have to bring into this development, right? And I believe that development of Gen AI needs to be deeply backed by customer understanding, solving real customer problems, really the empathy of the use cases, and not be driven by the hotness of the technology and the popularity. And only in this way, by solving real user problems, we can make sure this technology remains useful and not a hype and continues to evolve and advance.
That's great. And I just want to encourage people to, there's a difference between learning a new technology and individually applying it to your life and trying to use it in an external way with other communities in business and scaling. And I think for folks who want to get started, I think there are plenty of tools out there. Google has some open source places that you can start with. Vertex AI that was mentioned before, TensorFlow. But I think one of the things you really want to think about when you get into this new technology is determining the desirability and applicability of the technology to your use case. So really trying to figure out if it's desirable to use generative AI for the business problem that you're looking at, and documenting the limitations of the technology in the problem space that you're applying it to, really anchoring on those and understanding the limitations as well as the capabilities. I always tell my teams that generative AI forces us to design to the limitations of the technology, not its capability, because the limitations is where you're going to run into engagement risks. And so you really want to be grounded in those limitations, and you want to anchor on serving the user, the people who are going to use the product or the problem that you're solving, for the user group for the problem that you're solving, to determine the best way to apply ML and AI technology, and anticipate and monitor for unintended consequences, because that's the moment that you really want to design, right? So I would definitely encourage people to experiment on their own in their personal spaces. But when it comes to businesses and developing for folks, for people, to really kind of anchor yourself in understanding human behavior and human needs, and think of ML design as a human-computer relationship. Calculate the risks and benefits and needs through that mental model. And I think we'll have a lot safer way to engage with this technology, but also innovative.
And I'll just plug a few areas I'm excited about. There's Maker Suite, which is one way that developers can engage with generative AI really quickly. One of the areas I do cover is Collab, and it's what we use as researchers for experimentation and development in ML. And it's really a great tool, I think, for people who are getting into machine learning and generative AI to start using that. And then the additional part to all of this is I think a lot of this world benefits from Code AI, which is the application of generative AI to actual coding. And so that's also starting to manifest in Collab in chatbots and things that can actually really rapidly move forward towards a low-code environment. So
I think what I want to add here is, for those of you are new to generative AI, the good news is generative AI covers a broad spectrum of technologies, which means it doesn't matter what your background is, you will be able to find an entry point to get started with Gen AI. So focus on your own area of interest and start from there. Overall, generative AI is a tool, but not a solution. So what's meaningful is to embed generative AI into different industry verticals and utilize existing tools on the market to develop your solution.
And we are at time. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This was a great conversation, and I'm sure that our attendees learned a lot and really benefited from our discussion. Thank you so much for your time. If you are watching us and if you have any further questions, feel free to ask them in the chat and our moderators will answer your questions.